This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I made you a flowchart to figure out what part-time job you should get. It's basically a breakdown of the most common jobs students have, or like if you need to make money on the side hustle jobs, split into different categories that helps you see what fits you best. It's basically going to look at 3 things. So whether you want to work with people or mostly on your own, how flexible or steady you want the job to be, and also how physical the job is. Okay, starting with the first question. Everyone starts here. Would you rather work with people in this job or mostly alone? So you can either pick people-focused jobs or mostly solo jobs. So a people-focused job here, what I mean is like these are jobs where you need to like interact directly with other people. So for example, it might be a customer service job where you have to talk to customers, or like a job where you have to like look after people. For the mostly solo jobs, these are jobs where it doesn't mean you don't have to talk to anyone, but it means like you can work on your own most of the time with minimal outside interaction. So this is good if you like working for yourself and you don't really want to talk to other people while you're doing the job. Okay, so starting with people-focused jobs. If you want a people-focused or you don't mind talking to people, maybe you don't mind talking to people, then follow-up question from this is, are you looking for a flexible one-off job or more steady recurring shifts? So what I mean by this is for flexible or one-off jobs, this is like jobs where you decide when to work, or like you take on short-term tasks or gigs or projects, right? So like this is good if you want like control over your own schedule because it's part-time work, or like if you don't need consistent hours every week. So if you're short on time, or you only want like a little bit of money on the side when you have the time for it, then this might be the right option for you. So the other thing you can pick from is steady or recurring shift jobs. So these are more jobs where like you usually have a fixed schedule and you're expected to show up at the same time each week. So this is better if you want like stable routine, or if you want more stable or more predictable income. So maybe like you want to give 2 days a week to this job and you don't want to have to worry about like finding a new way to make money or like a new project every week, you know? Okay, so if you picked I want a flexible job or like a one-off gig type of job, then follow-up question from that is, would you rather this job use your body or your brain more? So I'm going to explain what I mean by this, right? So obviously for all jobs, you're going to have to use both your brain and your body, right? But like I split them generally between brain heavy and body heavy jobs just for simplicity's sake. So for brain heavy jobs, these are basically jobs where like most of the work is thinking or organizing, teaching. It's going to be basically, if you just think about it, like the brain heavy jobs are basically like jobs that you can do while sitting down. That's honestly that's probably it. Like you need to sit down at your job. It's also good if you prefer tasks that are like more focused or like problem solving based over like physical effort, right? So like you might need to like be in front of a computer or like documents in front of you, you know, like sitting jobs basically. Okay, contrast that to body heavy jobs. These are basically like part-time jobs where most of the work is physical or active. And as I said last time, it's basically like not sitting jobs. I probably should have phrased this as like, would you rather have a sitting or a standing job? Okay, so these are not sitting jobs. So obvious ones here, customer service, you have to stand behind a counter, or like being a mover, you know, this is good if you don't mind being on your feet and like doing more physical tasks. Okay, so starting with brain heavy jobs. So remember, here you picked flexible job, you don't mind working with people, you'd rather it be brain heavy than body heavy. So the right part-time job for you is a tutor. So a tutor is basically someone that helps students understand school subjects, usually one-on-one or like small groups, and it can be in person or online. So the reason that this is a flexible job is because you usually set your own hours with the students, right? And sessions can be weekly, but they're also like negotiated per client or like per student, and it's not like actually really part of a rigid shift schedule if you don't want it to be. Obviously, you might have repeat clients or students which come to you like weekly, let's say, but it's like more flexible than some of the other jobs on this list because you can take on as many or like as few students as you want, and you can also pause during exams or holidays or if you're traveling. Okay, moving back up on that graph, right? So if you'd rather have a body heavy job, so here it would be flexible job, working with people, body heavy, then the part-time jobs that you should get, number 1 is being a personal trainer. So a personal trainer, you train people and you help them meet their fitness goals through exercise programs, right? So it might be like demonstrating workouts or coaching proper form, motivating people, tracking their progress with like meal or training plans. So the job itself is very physically demanding, obviously, because you're moving around, you're like spotting lifts or like demonstrating exercise. It's also super people focused and you have to be interacting with people one-on-one a lot, so you have to make sure that you're okay with that. But one upside of this job that you probably have not considered, you've never thought of, is that this is one of the only jobs out there where like people pay you to yell at them or scold them. This is rare, right? This is a type of perk in a job which is like usually gatekept by experience. So like if you think about it, think about the jobs where you pay someone money for them to like tell you you're bad at something, or like where you pay someone to like yell at you, right? So what are jobs like that? Your lawyer, you're a doctor, army sergeant, maybe. But like, how old do you have to be to get into these jobs, right? Like how old, how much experience do you have to be like an army sergeant or like a doctor or a lawyer, right? Like how, like personal trainer, you also get to yell at people who pay you money to yell at them, but same perk, lower barrier to entry, okay? That should be the selling point, okay? I feel like no one talks about this. The only other obvious job I can think of off the top of my head, which has this perk, is being a matrix, but obviously I can't discuss that much here. I'll be demonetized. I went off tangent there, but another perk of being a personal trainer is that it's flexible. So most personal trainers set their own client sessions, right? So like you can choose how many clients to take on and when. So it's like not tied to weekly shifts in the same way like a barista or like a server job is. Okay, so another part-time job you can get, which is like pretty physically demanding, is being a nanny or a babysitter. So you basically take care of kids while parents are away. So like the day-to-day tasks could involve keeping the kids safe, obviously, preparing food, helping with homework, doing school pickups or like dropping the kids off at school, keeping them generally entertained and safe. Depending on the kids' ages, it can be physically demanding. So like running after a toddler or carrying babies. And it's also a pretty emotionally engaging or taxing job, again, depending on how you see it, because you have to like manage the kids' moods, resolve squabbles. So again, this is a flexible gig because nannying is often arranged directly with a family, right? So like the schedule depends on what they need, but it's also depending on like what you're willing to offer. And sometimes it could be regular shifts, like if you work with one family and you do it every afternoon, but it can also be ad hoc. So like if the parents are going on date night, and so you just do date night, or like weekends, school holidays, etc. Okay, so that wraps up all of the jobs which are flexible and people-based. So we're going to go back up one branch on the graph. So now we're going to talk about people-heavy or like people-focused jobs, which are more steady or like a recurring shift. So as I said, this is like jobs where you have to like show up on a more rigid schedule, even if it's like 2 days a week or like 1 day a week, you have to be there basically every week. So again, follow-up from that is, would you rather have like a body or like a brain-based job? Okay, so if you picked you want a brain-heavy job or like you want a more thinking job as opposed to like a physical job, then the first option you have is being a teaching assistant. So a teaching assistant is basically you support the teacher in a classroom. So you might help with like grading or setting up lessons and supervising students. So again, this is a steady recurring shift job because you're tied to like the class schedule, right? And it's usually fixed hours every week, and it's not really something you can like easily drop or swap out easily, but it just means that you have a more consistent paycheck. Another job you can get is being an admin assistant. So an admin assistant, you do like the office tasks like filing or like scheduling, answering the phone. Again, this is recurring because it's office based, so you're expected to be around during regular office hours. Most likely it'll be like a 9 to 5, a 9 to 6, etc. Another job you can get is being an executive assistant or a secretary. So here you basically are like the assistant to like a manager or an executive or a team in an office, right? So like some of the things you might be doing, like scheduling meetings, managing calendars, booking travel, preparing documents, and like you basically handle the correspondence. So like emails, calls, memos. In some cases, you might also be asked to like go sit in at meetings and take notes. So it's like a mix of like admin work and coordinating people's schedules, but it's like more responsibility than like a regular admin assistant. So again, because this job is office based, it runs on a steady schedule. So most likely office hours, and you need to be available. Basically, you need to be available when like the manager or the team is working, which is hopefully office hours and not overtime, hopefully. Another job you can get is being customer service or like help desk customer service. So you basically help customers with their questions or problems or complaints. So this can either happen over the phone or through live chat or email or even in person at like a service desk. So you know what this is, right? Like you basically answer questions about like the product and you fix account issues. You deal with like returns and like refunds. That's basically your job. So the reason this is in the recurring shift section is because customer service basically needs to be covered at like all times the business is open, which obviously means that you'll probably be put on like a fixed schedule. And obviously this job is people focused, but also like not in the good way, like not in the fun way, because you fucking know the stereotype of being in customer service, right? This is basically like the adult version of being like a nanny or a babysitter that I just mentioned in the other section of this video, except with like more articulate temper tantrums than a toddler. Not always, but sometimes. And just to pause really quick for a second, an important thing is that honestly a lot of these part-time jobs work way better if people can actually find you, right? So for example, if someone Googles like math tutor in whatever city or like dog walker near me, you want like your name to show up. Like there needs to be a good way for people to find you in order for you to actually make money from these part-time jobs. And that's why like SEO, so it's like search engine optimization, matters. Because if you just have like a private Instagram with like 200 followers and you just say like, oh, DM me if you need a dog walker, you're probably not getting many gigs. You're probably invisible outside of your friend circle. And that's why it's important for a lot of these jobs for you to have a site. And if you make one with built-in SEO tools, and you don't have to like actually know any anything about like keywords or like algorithms or SEO, because it automatically already gives your site a better chance of showing up when people search for like what you do, right? And that feature is something that you can do with today's sponsor, Squarespace. So using Squarespace, you can basically build a site that works as your portfolio or like your booking page, even a payment system, all in one place. And the best thing about Squarespace is that it's actually really easy to use. You can literally set up your site in one afternoon. It's drag and drop. There's like no coding involved, and it honestly looks way more professional than anything you'd probably put together from scratch. It's basically less of a pain in the ass if we're being honest, and honestly, if you're looking for a part-time job, right, you really don't want that much difficulty or friction between you and the money you make, which is why you're watching this video, right? Like, you're looking for a side hustle, like it's a means to an end for you, right? So like, make it easy for yourself. So if you're actually trying to get started with one of these part-time jobs, then go to squarespace.com/crystal for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use my code crystal to save 10% off your first website or domain. Okay, so that wraps up all of the brain heavy jobs, which are like more recurring shift and you don't mind working with people. Okay, so we're now going to go back up and look at body heavy jobs where you don't mind working with people, and also you want like recurring shift, you want a recurring schedule for your job. So the first option here is being a restaurant host. So a restaurant host is basically someone that greets customers at a restaurant and you seat them. So again, this is a recurring shift type of job because restaurants, obviously they run on set hours, so you're usually going to be scheduled for whatever shift. So like, it might be like a weekend shift or like an evening shift, so you need to be okay doing those. This is obviously body heavy, physically demanding, because you're on your feet the entire time, you're standing all the time, you're greeting people as they arrive, and you're like walking them to tables, checking the floor, so like constant back and forth, lots of walking, lots of movement. Another option here is being a dining hall or like a cafeteria worker. So you serve food or you like clean up in a school or work in the school cafeteria. So this is recurring shift because you're going to work during like the fixed cafeteria meal times, obviously with like lull periods in between meal times, but like the rush hours, like breakfast, lunch, dinner, can be very chaotic, very physically demanding. You're like serving food, you're refilling trays, you're like cleaning, wiping tables, carrying heavy tubs or heavy bins. Another job you can get is being a server. So a server, obviously, you know what that is, like a waiter, a waitress. You take orders and you bring food to tables at a restaurant. Again, you're locked into specific shifts depending on when the restaurant opens, and it's like physically demanding like the other jobs, and you have to walk like pretty quickly between tables and the kitchen, and you have to carry lots of heavy trays of food, drink, cleaning tables. You basically have to be okay balancing lots of like tasks under pressure. Another job you can get is being a barista. So a barista is someone that makes coffee and drinks, probably in a cafe or like a restaurant. Recurring shifts, again, this is a standing job. You're going to be standing all day making drinks, steaming milk, restocking supplies, cleaning the machines. And it might also involve a lot of like lifting like boxes of milk or like beans or pastries. And also, this is a job where you have to be okay working in the morning, right? Like if you're like a morning person, because mornings, obviously everyone's getting their coffee. So it can be very fast paced in the morning. The next job you can consider is being a bartender. So a bartender is someone that mixes and serves drinks, and depending on where you work, the job and the types of drinks that you make will vary. So if you worked at like a pub versus a restaurant versus a high-end cocktail bar, again, this is a recurring shift job because bars, restaurants, whatever establishment, they run on like consistent hours. Probably, most likely, it's going to be like pretty late nights, and shifts can be regular and very long. It's a pretty physically demanding job because you're mixing drinks nonstop, and there's a lot of lifting heavy bottles and kegs, wiping down counters, and just basically being on your feet in like a very high energy environment. I'd say as a caveat to this job in particular, this job is probably more socially demanding than like some of the other food and beverage jobs here, or like some of the other people focused jobs here, because while servers and baristas interact with customers, right, bartenders can often be like the main attraction. So like people sit at the bar specifically to talk to you, right? Like that can happen. So I'd say this job has a higher barrier to entry, or it requires more specific skills, because bartending often requires like learning very specific drink recipes or like mixing techniques, and sometimes like with flair, again, dependent on what establishment you're working at. Another thing to take note of specifically for this one is that it's usually like the environment, like it's going to be later shifts most likely, and it might also involve drunk customers or like louder crowds, louder people, so you have to make sure that you're okay with that if this is a job you want to get. But the upside is also that in a lot of places, bartenders often make more money than the other food and beverage jobs here, because you make more tips than some of the other jobs. So it depends on what you want to get out out of it. Like, it's more demanding, but it's also probably better paying. By the way, if you're watching this video and you're realizing you want like a copy of this chart on hand for easy reference, then you can get a copy of this chart at my shop. The link is up there and it's also in the description. Okay, and the final job in this category is being a retail assistant. So a retail assistant is basically you work in a store, you help customers, you stock the shelves, and you run like the cash register. So again, here you work recurring shift hours depending on the shop's business hours. And again, it could potentially include weekends or holidays. Pretty physically demanding job because you're walking around the store and you're standing at the register, stocking shelves, moving displays, etc. I'd say in comparison to like other jobs in food and beverage, this is not food, this is like retail. Retail is still pretty physical, but it's generally less intense moment to moment because like in a shop, you're going to get more periods of downtime like between customers. But if you're in like a restaurant or a cafe or just like anything to do with food, basically once the rush hits, like once people are fucking hungry, it's basically nonstop until close. Okay, so that wraps up the last of the jobs, which are people focused. So we're now going to move on to the second part of this graph, which is part-time jobs, which are mostly solo, right? Like jobs where you can work by yourself or like you don't want to talk to people. The first follow-up question from that is, would you rather get a flexible one-off job or like a steady recurring shift job? So I'm going to discuss it again if you didn't listen to the last part, if you fucking skipped through the chapters very quickly. Flexible or one-off job is basically like jobs where you decide when to work. They're like short-term jobs, short-term gigs, good for if you want to control your own schedule, you don't need consistent hours, versus a steady or recurring shift job. It's like jobs where you have a fixed schedule, right? So like you're expected to show up at the same time each week. So it's better if you want stable, predictable income. Okay, so starting with if you said you want a flexible or one-off job, then follow-up question from this is, would you rather use your body or your brain more? So again, I'm going to break it down really quickly. For brain-heavy jobs, this is basically jobs where like more of the work is thinking or like organizing, like lower physically demanding, right? So these are basically good if you prefer tasks that use focus or like problem solving over physical effort, versus body heavy jobs. These are jobs where like most of the work or like what you're getting paid for is like physicality or like being active, right? So this is good if you don't mind being on your feet or like doing physical things. Okay, so starting with brain heavy jobs. So again, this is brain heavy jobs. You don't want to talk to people and you want it to be flexible or like gig based. So the first job in this category is being a freelance writer. So as a freelance writer, you might be writing content for like clients. So it could be like blog posts, articles, newsletters, or like online guides. You basically research a topic and then you draft the writing piece, you edit it to fit the client's styles or their needs or their demands. And depending on the gig, it could also be ghostwriting. So like that's when the client pretends to be you and like you're not credited for the job, or like it can be credited. So it depends on the gig. So this is flexible and it's like a solo type of work because most of the work, most of the writing happens in your own time. And clients usually just care about like deadlines, not hours that you're working. So like you can basically just slot writing in whenever you're free. And it's basically like you and your laptop. Another job, which is very similar to this, is being a copywriter. So a copywriter is like a writer, but it's like a specific writer where you're writing persuasive text that sells something, right? So it could be like an ad slogan or like a product description, website copy, or like email campaign. So this is like, again, it's a freelance writer, but like a specific type of writing. The focus here is like making the writing really clear and catchy. And it's basically you want people to like click or buy the product, right? So again, this is flexible and solo because it's like project-based work. You deliver the drafts by deadline. You don't have to sit in an office from 9 to 5. You can work wherever you want, right? Like at home or like in a cafe or in a casino. If you really wanted to, they're open 24/7. So like wherever you like, basically. Another job in this category is being a graphic designer. So you make visuals or you design things for a client. So it might be like a logo or a social media post, posters, website layout. It usually involves using design software, so like Photoshop or Illustrator or Canva. Obviously here, you're gonna need some like visual design skills to get this job. So like it's a more specific barrier to entry in that sense. And again, most design jobs are like freelance or contract based. You can take on as many projects or like as few projects as you want. And the deadlines, again, are usually the only thing that matters. But other than that, the work is like independent, right? So it's flexible. You do it whenever and like wherever you want to. Another job in this category is being a virtual assistant. So a virtual assistant is basically like a personal assistant, but like you do it remotely. You do it virtually, right? So you work for a client and then you might be like doing stuff like managing their calendar, like scheduling meetings, organizing emails, updating spreadsheets, databases, and like keeping track of things. So like invoices, expenses, basic bookkeeping. So the reason this is flexible and solo is because most virtual assistant roles are like task based. So it means the client cares that the work gets done by the deadline, not necessarily when you do it, right? Unless you're hired to cover specific hours, in which case that's different. And like communication usually happens through email or Slack or like Zoom check-ins rather than having constant face-to-face interaction, which is why it's still considered like a solo job. And the final job in this category is being a social media manager. So a social media manager, you basically run like a brand or like a person's social media account. So like it might be Instagram or like their Twitter feed. So you basically plan posts, you write captions, you schedule content, you make like the graphics or videos, and you also like check analytics to see what's working. Sometimes you might also like respond to comments or messages, but most of it is like creative planning or posting. So again, this is flexible and solo because a lot of like social media work is like asynchronous. So it means like the work doesn't have to happen all at the same time. So for example, if you're posting something, you can schedule the post ahead of time, or like you can batch create a bunch of content and then release it slowly. You can basically like check analytics or metrics at your own schedule. Okay, so that wraps up all of the jobs which are solo, flexible, and brain heavy. So we're now going to go back up and we're going to discuss jobs which are flexible, solo, but body heavy. So the first job in this category is being a food courier. So what I mean by this is you're the Uber Eats or the Deliveroo guy, right? So like you're the guy that's like picking up food or like packages and you drop them off at the right address. So depending on your driver's license or like what you prefer, you might be a courier that drives a car, or you ride a bike, or even walking, but that's fucking crazy, to be honest. I have no fucking clue. Maybe you're sprinting. I have no idea. I've never done it, depending on the app or the company. So this is a flexible and solo job because most delivery jobs, especially like the app-based ones, let you choose your own hours, right? Like you log in when you want to work and then you log off when you're done. And it's solo because you're mostly on the move by yourself, and the interactions are basically limited to like giving people their food or like receiving food from the restaurant or like at the doorstep. By the way, if you're watching this video and you're realizing, actually, Crystal, I'm kind of looking to get like a full-time job, like I actually want more detailed advice on like a wider range of careers, or like I want a career that's more in line with my values, then you should check out this other video I made about what career you should get, and I break it down by like different roles and careers based on your own value system, right? The link is up there and I'll also put it in the description. But basically it goes through jobs based on like what's actually important to you, right? So for example, if you want a job that pays a lot, or like if you want a job about something that you're passionate about, or if you want to work for a cause that you feel strongly about. The second job in this category is being a dog walker. So dog walker, you take the dogs out for walks, right? You make sure you talk to dogs, you hang out with dogs, you make sure the dogs get exercise, bathroom breaks. Sometimes it's just one dog at a time, sometimes it's multiple. It depends on what the owner wants. You're basically responsible for keeping the dog safe and like handling any surprises on the walk. You usually arrange walks directly with the client or like through an app, so you can set your own schedule. It's solo in practice because it's just you and the dog, but there's like a small people element because you check in with the owners, confirm timing, routes, but it's just dogs. It's you and dogs. And if dogs aren't your thing, or if you prefer other animals, then another job you can get is being a pet sitter. So a pet sitter, you look after pets while the owners are away, right? So like you might be feeding the pets, changing water, cleaning up litter or like cages, and like walking them if it's like an animal that needs to be walked. You basically just spend time. You get paid to like hang out with animals. Sometimes you stay in like the owner's house, but you can also just like stop by for visits. It depends on what the owner wants. Again, flexible, solo, because pet sitting is usually like a one-off thing, right? Like it's arranged case by case. It's similar to like babysitting, except with like more or less slobbering and like more or less coherent words. I'm not sure which is which, but you take on like short visits, overnight stays. It could be like a week-long gig depending on your availability. Okay, so that wraps up the last of the jobs, which are solo and flexible or one-off gigs. So we're now going to go into the final little group in this graph, which is you want a solo job, but you want it to be steady or recurring shifts. So again, this is jobs where you want like a fixed schedule, you want steady, predictable income. So again, follow-up question from this, would you rather use your brain more or your body more at this job? Starting with brain-heavy jobs, the first job in this category is in data entry. So data entry, what you do is basically you enter numbers or like text or other information into like spreadsheets or databases. So some of the tasks you might be doing, it might be like updating customer records or like transferring handwritten notes into like digital forms, so like digitizing information, keeping track of sales and inventory. It's like a pretty straightforward job, but obviously you can probably tell it's like a pretty repetitive job that requires a lot of like attention to detail and accuracy. So the reason this is a recurring shift job is because most companies want data entry done during regular business hours, so you're usually like on a pretty set schedule rather than like picking up tasks whenever you feel like it. Another job in this category is a virtual assistant, but the recurring shift version of a virtual assistant. So it's more like a remote secretary. So as explained in the previous section of this video, a virtual assistant is basically someone that like helps a client or like a company with ongoing admin work. So like scheduling meetings or like replying to emails, organizing files. But some of the jobs can be recurring as opposed to more freelance because some people like prefer you to be available at specific times every day. So it's almost like being a remote secretary because you kind of work consistently with like the same client or like the same team, same group of people. Another job in this category is being a library assistant. So this job is basically you help out in like a library or an academic setting. So it might be like checking books in and out, organizing material on shelves, maintaining databases, or like assisting researchers and like finding and gathering resources. And obviously this job, it involves like very light customer service, but I'd say the majority of the work is like behind the scenes. So it's like the bulk of the task is still independent. That's why it's like in the solo category in this graph. It's like sorting and like organizing or like looking up information quietly, often without too much group interaction. And it's recurring shift because libraries obviously run on fixed schedules, and so assistants are usually expected to like work certain shifts during the week. And the final job in this category is being a research assistant. So a research assistant, again, you spend time gathering data, you look at information, you review papers, or you organize, you help out like a professor or a researcher. A lot of that is still done alone or like on the computer, even though you have to kind of have minimal minor interactions on and off. So again, this is a recurring shift job because research offices usually run on like a fixed schedule, so assistants are usually expected to work certain hours during the week. Okay, so that wraps up all of the brain-heavy jobs, which are solo and recurring shifts. So now we're going to move into the final category in this graph, which is you want a solo job, which is steady or recurring shift, and you'd prefer for it to be body-heavy as opposed to brain-heavy. So the first job in this category is being a cleaner. So a cleaner, you clean spaces, right? Like offices, homes, schools, public buildings. So stuff you're doing as a cleaner, you might be like vacuuming, mopping floors, wiping down surfaces, emptying trash, cleaning bathrooms. You basically keep things neat, tidy, clean. Depending on the workplace, you might also be handling things like restocking supplies or like disinfecting shared areas. So this is recurring shifts in solo because cleaning usually happens on like a pretty set schedule. So it's either daily or like nightly or weekly. So employers kind of want reliable shifts covered. And it's solo because once you're kind of given the area or like the checklist of what you need to do, you typically work alone without much interaction. You just kind of have to like finish all of the tasks. And the second job in this category is being a packer. So a packer is basically someone that works in a warehouse or a shop to prepare orders for shipping, right? So the day-to-day tasks might involve like picking up items from shelves, checking labels, wrapping, boxing them, and just making sure that everything's ready for delivery. And this job is like physically demanding because it can include like lifting pretty heavy packages and like organizing stock. And again, this is a recurring shift job because warehouses and shops need staff at regular hours to keep orders moving. So packer jobs are like tied to fixed shifts. And the reason I put this in like solo category is because even though you're not gonna be like physically alone, right? Because there's gonna be like other packers there. The work itself is like independent and like task driven. So like you don't actually have to really talk to anyone. It's like very little people interaction compared to something like retail or server work. So that wraps up the jobs in this graph. I hope that was helpful to you. Thank you for watching this video. As mentioned previously, if you watch this video and you realize actually you want like a more full-time job, or you want to figure out like a more fully fledged career, or if you just want like more of my career videos, then you can check out this playlist I made here or this video that YouTube thinks you should watch next.